Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Here again with my co-host and Hall of Famer, Steve Flink. We started this long road. We're getting closer. We're inching closer to Roland Garros. Madrid is now complete. Rome is in what we're recording this Monday night, as we usually do. The Rome tournament starts another 10-day event, just like Madrid was, in a couple days. You ready to recap Madrid and talk a little bit about Rome moving forward?
Sure. No, it's an exciting time in the clay court season leading up to Roland Garros, and I'm ready to talk about both gladly.
So, I mean, we kind of left it on a cliffhanger our last episode, talking about Carlos Alcaraz playing Sasha Zverev because of the history that they had, right? The year before, Carlos trounced Zverev in the final. But then a couple of weeks later, Zverev beat Carlos in that French Open. So now, repeat of last year, basically the same result of last year in Madrid. Carlos was just way too good for Zverev on that day.
Yeah, it was even worse than last year. This time it was 1-2. Zverev looked very depressed when he went up with a handshake after the match. You know, he was a bit humiliated. Not that Carlos had behaved badly; he just had beaten him to a pulp. And I think Zverev went out there believing he could at least keep it close and that he'd sort of sink his teeth into the match. It never happened. Didn't have a particularly good serving day, and Carlos was really primed for that contest. So surprisingly one-sided. And so the woes of Zverev continue, David. I mean, he's had a tough time. These close losses to Medvedev, a few surprising upsets. This is an opportunity to play Carlos again after having beaten him at the French last year, maybe reverse the result in Madrid, and it just didn't work out well for him at all. A combination of Alcaraz at his very best and Sasha at, I would say, somewhere at 70 to 80%, 75 to 80%, not good enough.
You know, when we were watching that match and I texted you after, and, you know, it was one of those, you know, how do you beat Carlos? And we're going to get into this later because Struff played him tough, and we're going to get into that later. But I mean, there were some things that Struff did that made life a little difficult for Carlos, and we're going to get into that in a bit. But after viewing the Zverev match, which Carlos won easily, you know, we're saying, you know, how do you beat Carlos, right? You can't hit through him. He defends incredibly well. He's comfortable moving forward. He has great variety. And I said to you, it was almost like what people were saying, a young Rafa almost.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, he lost a set to Ruusuvuori. He was in trouble against Ruusuvuori at the start of the tournament. Down a set, 2-3, 5 break points that would have put him down 4-2. Then he really kind of took command in the rest of his matches, although there were always moments. 4-2 down in the second set against Dimitrov. He wins that set. Hachinov almost had him 2 breaks down in their match. It was 4-1 with a couple of break points for 5 when Carlos rallies from 2-5 and runs out that set. So there were moments, but by and large, comfortable until the Struff final. In the Struff final, once again, it was somebody coming at him full force, David, and it's hard to execute. It's hard to find that level of controlled aggression that's necessary. But Struff did a terrific job of that and made it very competitive from beginning to end.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, you just see some of these matches that Carlos is winning, and you're just like, where's the weakness, right? You have to find a weakness. Maybe Struff had something that we're going to get into in a bit, but it's unbelievable what young Carlos Alcaraz has done in his young career. All right, let's switch over to the ladies' side. On Thursday, there was a intriguing semi between Maria Sakkari and Sabalenka. Sabalenka won that match 6-4, 6-1. First set, both players absolutely just blasting the ball. Second set, Sabalenka ran away with it. But I want to talk to you about what Prakash Amritraj on Tennis Channel said after, and he was talking about Sakkari. And he says things that I think you and I have discussed as well, and many other tennis viewers have said as well. But the way he phrased it was pretty well. He said, she does everything well. And you watch her on the practice court, she's amazing. There's no real weakness when you see her, right? So what does that mean? It means it's all between the ears. And I know you have said that. It's all mental with her, right? Because you look at her game, there's really no weakness when you look at ground stroke, volleys, serve. Yeah, serve has gotten a little bit better over the years, right? But what are your thoughts on what Prakash said? It really is, mental with her.
Yeah, mental. I mean, she's also obviously she's not the biggest girl out there. There's
Strong
some,
though, very
she's
strong.
strong, but there are some with more powerful frames. You look at a Sabalenka. I guess if you want to really break it down to that in that final way, but yeah, I'd say it's more mental, and I'd say that I don't know whether this issue can be resolved. She's the kind of player I see constantly throughout the next 3 or 4 years. Constantly, you see her in the latter stages of tournaments, semis and finals, lots of quarters, keeping her.
Which is not bad for a career at all.
No, and maybe she squeezes into a Grand Slam final, but I just feel like there's somebody around the corner almost every time, whether it's a Swiatek, whether it's Sabalenka, whoever it might be. Now, she did play very well against Badosa.
Yes.
So that was nice to see. And Badosa's been hot, but I worry about, I don't know what her expectations are. I just feel like maybe she doesn't ever reach the very top, but she's always in the upper regions, which is no disgrace.
No disgrace at all. Okay, let's flip it back to the men's semi. And the intriguing semi was Karatsev versus Struff. And why was that, right? Why was that? Look, for those that don't know the history, Karatsev played Struff in the qualifying draw. Okay, this happens extremely rare, right? Karatsev actually beat Struff in the qualies, and he beat him pretty convincingly, Steve, 6-4, 6-2. Now you say, okay, Struff loses in qualies. How'd Struff even get into the main draw? For those that don't know, there's this thing called lucky loser, and a lucky loser is while you do get knocked out in qualifying, you still get in because another competitor. Most time it's a person who qualified, they withdraw from the tournament because of illness or injury or another reason. So it's like a second chance. And that's how Struff got into the main draw. He then gets on a roll. So obviously Karatsev, they meet in the semis. And this time the result is reversed. Struff beats Karatsev 4-6, 6-3, 6-4. The other semi was kind of, more one-way traffic. Alcaraz over Coric. George had a good run, 6-4, 6-3. But that semifinal rematch of what happened in a qualifying draw, extremely rare case, Steve.
Rare. It reminded me, though, in some ways, David, of the year-end championships. A lot of times we've had rematches from the round robin into the final. A couple of years back, Zverev and Medvedev, where the result was reversed. In that case,
but those are like 8 players. I mean, it's so much smaller.
Right, but what I mean is, at this level, it's tough to beat somebody twice in that short a span. You kind of feeling it's just not easy psychologically to have to beat them a second time. And I think Karatsev was hurting a bit. Something going on with his leg maybe hampered him slightly. And then Struff had come off a series of really hard-fought wins, including one in the previous round over Tsitsipas.
Yes.
So I think he just had the confidence. It was great to see it. He's now at a career-high ranking by getting to the final at 28 in the world, and he's 33 years old, and you have to admire him. And boy, that final was just electrifying at times, and his tactics were perfect. The execution wasn't always wasn't impeccable every time out, but boy, he played it right, and he made Carlos extremely uncomfortable at times.
And we're still going to get there. We got about a minute. We got about a minute or two before we get to that final.
Sure.
We're making the listeners wait. We're going to switch back now. It's literally like a tennis match. We're going to switch back to the women's final. And, at the end, we've talked for a while now. It's kind of this, quote unquote, big three, the three, women on top, getting deep into tournaments more consistently now. And who is that? That's Swiatek, Sabalenka, Rybakina. This time it was Swiatek versus Sabalenka. Sabalenka wins this one in 3 sets, 6-3, 3-6, 6-3. These 3 players, and again, we've talked about like Jessie Pegula and those just outside those top 3. These 3 that I mentioned, Swiatek, Sabalenka, Rybakina, they're a little bit level ahead of the rest, no?
Yes, they are. But as we also discussed, I don't put Rybakina quite up there on clay as I do. Once we get past the clay court season, she's going to do fantastic things. Getting on the grass, going back to try to defend Wimbledon. She'll be great on the hard courts. I'm not as convinced about her game on clay as I am the other 2. The other 2 wouldn't surprise me a bit if Sabalenka and Swiatek met in this Rome final and again in the Roland Garros final. Wouldn't be a bit surprised. So, and by the way, great effort from Sabalenka, because it was for lack of a better term, a topsy-turvy match. It wasn't a typical 6-6-3, 3-6-6-3. They kept having these streaks of 3-game sequences, or one would get on a roll and the other would break back and win 3 games. So it happened in the final set. 3-love back to 3-all. Swiatek makes the recovery, and you think maybe she's going to do it. And then Sabalenka broke her again and closed out the match on a run of 3 straight games herself. But really terrific tennis. I do think, David, a quick capsule comment on that. The conditions in Madrid better for Sabalenka. The high altitude, the speed of the condition. I still take Swiatek on the slower clay of Rome or Roland Garros, but it was a very important win for Sabalenka psychologically to avenge her loss to Swiatek not long before that in another final. So I feel like that will do her a lot of good. While I don't think it's going to dent the confidence of Swiatek that much. Hard fought 3-set match. She played really well. She looked pretty happy with her performance. And in the end, yeah, she didn't like losing, but she knew how tight it was. So I think they both take something significant away from that match.
Yeah, I agreed on all points. And it'll be interesting to see how those 3 players do, going forward, Rome and in Roland Garros. So all eyes on that. Okay, now men's final, Rome. And again, I mean, I've gotten some texts from people who aren't, as crazy tennis fans as we are, and a lot of our listeners are. But to have someone like Struff who comes out of the qualifying and go toe to toe with Carlos Alcaraz, we've said it all the time, Steve. The depth in men's tennis, is ridiculous, right? Everyone is so good down the line. And for a while we just had these big 3 guys of Novak, Rafa, and Roger, and then the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, they seem like ways away from the big 3, but that's not how the world works, right? Everyone is so good, and this is an example of it. And the first set, like you said, Struff came in with a great plan. Always easier said than done, right? You could have the greatest plan in the book. If you can't execute it, that's the issue. But the one thing that I think is giving Carlos headaches was that kick serve to the ad side. With Struff being 6'4", it wasn't getting high, and we'll put this on video so you see how I'm trying to hit a 2-hander way above my shoulder. He wasn't getting it out of Struff's comfort zone, and like you said, it was in his sweet spot, and Struff was taking it right to Carlos.
Oh, absolutely. No, his return. I also like the way Struff returned from the deuce court. Carlos tried to beat him with some speed down the tee at times, and that also was not working terribly well. He made Carlos do a lot of thinking. Unfortunately for Carlos, Carlos is an incredibly guileful player for somebody his age. I mean, he really does know how to think his way through great difficulties, and he dealt with it in the end. But boy, I mean, every service game in the opening set was a struggle. He had the break, he gave it back, and then even when he served out the set, Carlos, it was 5-4, love 40. He held from love 40, which again is very typical of him, poised under pressure. But Struff was doing the right things and putting him under pressure. Second set, Struff wins it. Could have almost gone up 2 breaks, and then eventually.
I thought he was going to go away to lose a tough first set to Carlos 6-4, and then he was up 3-0 right out. Struff's up 3-0 right out of the chute. You don't typically see that with a lot of players against Carlos. Credit to Struff for doing that.
No, and then he kept holding out, had a long game to hold for 4-1, got it, almost broke again, and then eventually closed it out. What was interesting about his on-serve play, and we've talked about his returning, was early on, a lot of serving and volleying. Then he didn't do it quite as much later, but he kept Carlos a little off guard with that. But as Mark Pecci and Jim Curry were pointing out, and I hope Struff's coach will work on this. When you look at his backhand volley, the technique is not right. And he's such a big guy, and he's giving himself relatively easy backhand volleys. He made some of the tougher ones that were almost all just instinct and reflex and stabs. But some of the higher backhand volleys that he should have been able to knock off or angle away, too much of a straight arm. The technique needs to be improved. But boy, I like the way he kept Carlos pretty unsettled. And he had the first chance to break in the third, by the way, and Carlos got out of that. Carlos could have been down an early break and might have made that set very different. But Carlos struck first, and then he used his, the great confidence that he has in himself over the last year. And he just believed he was the better player. And in the end, he proved that. But it was a great effort from Struff to go out there, because he didn't know going in. He basically was saying going in, look, I know I had those great matches with Carlos. You know, they played at Roland Garros, they played at Wimbledon, and you know, he'd done very well against him. You know, he'd beaten him once, he lost another five setter, but he knew that he was playing a different Carlos from even the one that he played a year ago. And his feeling was, if I'm not on top of my game, I could get killed. I think that's what he was really thinking going in. So he's got to be pleased that he did put up a top-notch performance, and he pushed Carlos to the hilt. And in the end, he loses on basically on one break in the third set was all it came down to. He's going to go forward with this, and I really want to see him not so much just at Roland Garros, because we know he can play well on clay, but the rest of the season, the Wimbledon with that big
on
game,
faster courts, yes,
faster courts, the hard court season. You know, maybe he goes from 28. Wouldn't shock me to see him go somewhere between 15 and 20 in the world.
And just to add to your thoughts, and this is more of a teaching lesson for those who play or coach, and Jim Courier mentioned it too. When you're serving to an ad side and you're trying to get that kicker up to a tall guy and it's just not working, one thing Jim Courier mentioned, and Carlos did it a few times, to Carlos' credit, go to the body, go to serve into the person's body.
Right.
And that gave Struff a little bit more difficult, because again, guys, big wingspan, they like to get their arms out there. If you go to the body, it gives them more problems. Carlos did do that a few times. It was more effective. One other thing, Steve, I wanted to throw out there.
David, just one quick thing about that. I agree, but I credit Struff, because if that body serve was not located perfectly, he still hit some bullet returns off of that. I mean, you got to make sure you really crowd him. And Carlos did that most of the time, but I thought it was a really impressive returning performance with Struff, far better than anybody would have anticipated.
Were you surprised? I didn't think Carlos hit a lot of backhands down the line during the match, which he usually does, which could open up the court all sorts of ways. He didn't hit a lot of backhands down the line.
No, you're right. And he didn't drop shot that much, but I have to attribute that largely to Struff. The pace and the depth of his shots was keeping Carlos on his heels. So maybe he just didn't have as much time to set up and operate the way he does against most other players, where you feel like he's sort of dictating the course of the match, playing the points on his terms. I felt like for the most part, he was not able to, he had to react more than he would have wanted. So again, that just shows you, to me, how well Struff played yesterday.
So let me ask you, we've seen Sinner beat Carlos in some, fantastic matches. Was how Struff played, is that maybe the strategy going in? Now, again, it depends who your player is, right? Not everyone can play like Struff played, but is that the best bet to maybe go after Carlos, go big or go home and play short points? Struff had no interest in playing long rallies, and I don't blame him.
I think it is. And I believe it is. We've seen it with Sinner, Rusevori. No, I mean, you really got to come at him with a lot of pace and depth, and take his rhythm away and take his time away. That was done yesterday. Yeah, I think so. On the other hand, easier said than done.
Oh, and so much easier said than done.
And Struff naturally plays that way. He likes to play that way. For a lot of other guys, they have to come out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
Take chances that they'd rather not take, but otherwise they're just going to get destroyed.
Well, that's the right. I mean, what's the downside of taking risks that you're maybe not comfortable doing? If you play your normal game, you're going to lose anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll see. All right. So we got Carlos, Rome, Roland Garros, Novak. Now, should we go to? Before we go to Rome, there was something interesting, and we talk about the depth of men's tennis. And I know this isn't normal, but the Challenger. There were a couple Challenger events that happened this time. And you had an Andy Murray, Tommy Paul final. And if you said that to, Andy Murray and Tommy Paul final in a Challenger, people not knowing what's going on, people look at you like you're crazy. But because of the schedule and because of how it worked out, yes, Andy Murray did play Tommy Paul in a Challenger final. Andy won that match 2-6, 6-1, 6-2. Steve, he's ranked number 42. That's like his best ranking in 5 years before his surgery, I believe.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable. I have to say, I wouldn't have picked that result, and I certainly wouldn't have picked 2-6, 6-1, 6-2. I might have picked 2-6, 7-5, 7-6.
Yes.
So that I would love. I'm going to try to dig up, see if I can find something on YouTube. I want to see how Andy pulled it off that decisively the last two sets, but it obviously was a real morale booster for him. Probably a little disappointing for Tommy. who I think went in probably expecting to win and certainly didn't expect to lose the last two sets so decisively after obviously starting so well. But it's a great booster, Andy, who obviously is hoping to push it up even further, because then he could put himself, he keeps having these good results and he has a decent Roland Garros. He could get himself seated, if not seated at Roland Garros, which probably seems less likely to me, he could get himself seated at Wimbledon, which would mean a lot to him.
It's just, these draws, and with Clay, and I know Andy just won a challenger, right? But like, for him to do well at Roland Garros, it's just going to be difficult. I mean, we don't even know the draw, obviously, but it's going to be really hard.
Oh, it is. But what I'm saying is, I wouldn't shock me if he sort of willed his way through 2-3 matches, maybe get to the round of 16 with some hard fought victories. But even that would help in terms of the rankings. So he's just trying to get himself up those 10 notches from 42 to 32. So that Wimbledon, he can have a couple of rounds facing non-seeded players and try to get his teeth in the tournament that way.
Yeah, let's hope so. Another name I wanted to mention, who also won a challenger, Sloane Stephens. And Sloane, I mean, she's really had a tough go of it the last few years. Such a wonderful person. I've actually had the person who runs her foundation on the pod a couple of years ago, who's great. Sloane does so much good work for her foundation. Just a great person. Always seems happy. At times, she has just seemed miserable. She just seems miserable on the court. I know there was some family stuff going around about a year ago, I think, with maybe one of her grandparents or whatnot. But she's really had a tough go of it the last couple of years. She won the challenger this past week. So maybe this will spur her on to better results as we move forward to it. Let's hope so.
Yeah, I would think it would, because on the top tier event, she hasn't really been herself for quite a while. And you think back to what we saw from her back in 17 and 18, winning the Open finals of the French finals of the year-end championships, that's 18 season. Those were great seasons for her. She's had trouble living up to that since, but I get the feeling this one might catapult her again. I mean, at least to see Sloane, let's get her back in the top 20 in the world. I mean, I'm convinced that she belongs in that territory, and this will be a substantial confidence boost for her to win that event.
Let's hope so. All right, let's talk Rome. Unfortunately, we all still know Rafa. Let's start there, Steve. He's never played the French Open with no prep. He's never done that.
Yeah, never. And not only that, not having played since Australia.
Right.
To play up through Indian Wells, and he didn't have clay court matches, but he had matches a couple of months ago. He hasn't played really, so we're going back to January, and that was the second round of the Australian. And then here he is still searching for answers here. I don't know. I'm not confident now about him playing Roland Garros. Obviously, he'll play if he feels he's physically up to it. Maybe the scenario might be that he finds something the week before. I don't know, because he's never liked to do that in the past. Is he playing an event the week before Roland Garros? He could think about it, but it looks pretty bleak to me, at least in terms of Roland Garros. It doesn't mean that his career is over, but It means that his desire to get back and win a 15th at Roland Garros this year is looking highly unlikely. And then the question will be, could he get ready in time for Wimbledon and the summer and the hard courts and back to the US Open? I don't know. It's been a very arduous road for him. He's been very unlucky with his latest hip injury, keeping him out much longer than he had been told it would.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's just stick with Roland Garros. Let's say he doesn't play a warm-up event. Now, even if he does the week before, I'll even give you that. Is he in your top 3 favorites to win the tournament?
That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe top 5. I just feel maybe. I mean, I'm still putting Carlos. And depending on what we see from Novak in Rome, and I'm putting Tsitsipas in there somewhere too. I don't know. Maybe Rafa, but he'd be a distant 4 or 5 to me. He wouldn't be, because I just feel like he's also going to be worried about possibly re-injuring. He's just not going to know what to expect, and practice is just not the same as match play. So, and he knows.
And it's 3 out of 5. You're not even going into a 2 out of 3 event.
Right. And in the past, 3 out of 5 was really for his opponents was a scenario.
It was to Rafa's advantage. Right. It was to Rafa's
Totally to his
advantage.
advantage because you didn't want to play him in best of 5. Right now, given what he's been through, he just doesn't have the same built-in advantage in that format. So you got to feel for him. It's been a tough.
He wants to play it, Steve. He wants to try.
But he doesn't want to humiliate himself either. It'd be pretty disappointing to go there and lose in the second round. I know that seems ridiculously unlikely at this point, but after what he's been through, I don't know. I don't know what we would expect from him, whether he could get near the level he would need to be to.
That's interesting you said that. That's interesting you said that. It'd be interesting to see if he loses. Let's say he plays, right? He tries, he wants to. Let's say he loses the second round. Next year he's healthy, and let's say he wins it. You think he looks back at this tournament like second round is whatever? He was hurt.
He would be able to forget it, yes, but I don't think he can look that far, David. I think in his mind, he doesn't know. I mean, he's going to turn 37. So he'd be coming back to Roland Garros next year. He'd be looking at 38. I don't know whether he believes that's necessarily possible. So that's why I think he's trying so hard to find a way to play it this year, because he feels he could be possibly gone next year, that it might not, he might have decided to retire by then. So all those things have to be traveling around his mind and making the decision all the more difficult.
Good points there. Yeah, very good points. Okay, here's crazy thing. And I mean, when you think about it, it's true. But when you read about it, it was like, whoa, that is true. Rome will be the first tournament of the year with both Carlos and Novak in the draw. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you think about it. Started a course where Carlos had gotten hurt at the end of last year, and then he got re-injured again, kept him out of Australia. Novak wins Australia. Then Novak only played one tournament in Dubai after that. Carlos reemerged on the clay. He got hurt. Okay. Djokovic is not in Indian Wells in Miami. Carlos wins one, semis at the other. We figure Monte Carlo. No, Carlos pulls out of Monte Carlo with an injury. Then they could have been in the Madrid draw together, but Djokovic was out in Madrid and trying to come back in Rome. So there we are, finally at long last. Now the hope is to keep them both healthy. Now they've had so many injuries, each of them, that we could find, because we only have the one meeting last year in Madrid. I mean, and that's the last. So even last year was scattered because Novak wasn't at the US Open when Carlos won the Open. So these last two slams that they split, neither one had to go through the other. And they haven't played anywhere else either. So I think the public, all of us, are thirsting to see them play.
And again, that crazy stat, and we hope this doesn't happen, but if Rafa and Novak do not play Roland Garros, obviously Fed won't be there. That would be the first slam since, what did we say, 1999, that the big three has not been in a slam. But hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully we'll get one and hopefully two to play. So
it's a good sign that Djokovic is entered. He didn't pull. If he had pulled out, that would have been very worrisome to me. That
if he had pulled out of Rome, you're talking about,
pull out of Rome, that would have been worrisome to me about any good prospects for Roland Garros. On the other hand, we still don't know whether we're going to see the Novak who was only a shadow of himself in Monte Carlo and Bosnia, where he won one match in each tournament, or are we going to see the essential Novak who was on top of the world, winning his 10th Australian Open title at the start of the year. So I think it's a really crucial tournament for him. That he doesn't have to win it, but he really wants to play well and go deep into the draw and feel
healthy going through it.
Feel healthy and be much closer to the top of his game, and then go to Roland Garros on the ascendancy. But if he were to lose early again and the elbow is acting up, I don't even want to think about that.
Yeah, let's not. The draws just came out. The women's draw came out yesterday. The men's draw just came out a few hours ago. One on the women's side was interesting. Possible second round, Ons Jabeur against Paula Badosa, who we just mentioned briefly on the spot. Badosa was hot, right? She crushed Coco, and then Sakari beat her in straight sets. I know we don't like to look too far into the draw. Anything on the draw, men's or women's, that you want to talk about, or we'll just kind of wait until we do the next one?
Yeah, I think it looks to me like a well-balanced draw. I mean, I look, for instance, at Carlos's draw. That I don't see it. I don't see any half beating him. Novak has a tricky half in a way. He might have to play Holger Rune. He might have to play Sinner. it looks intriguing to me, but nothing stands out alone. I just want to see how it plays out. And again, we just don't know who's going to have the letdown. Is Felix going to finally find some form? There's a lot of imponderables when it comes to Rome, which is going to be a very important event for many of the players as they set their sights on Roland Garros.
No, it'll be interesting. Like you said, Felix, right? Where has he been? Right. I know he's been hurt. We haven't heard his name as of late. Well, yeah, and we'll do another one, and we'll get more into the substance of Rome as that tournament starts. One other thing I want to mention, and I've had a lot of coaches on this pod, a lot of college coaches, but the NCAA Team Championships are going on, which is always fun for me, more so than the individuals, just because the team atmosphere around it and everything. The NCAA is both the men and women are in their round of 16, and I have some of those relationships and some friends who are coaches there. So I wish all the teams best of luck there. They got the round of 16. I think some play Friday, some play Saturday, and then they have the quarters and then obviously the semis and finals. So if you're near an area where you can see some of this, definitely go. College tennis it's very different than watching pro tennis. The environment's completely different. I guarantee you'll have I guarantee you'll have a fun time watching it, even if you're not. Even if you don't have a rooting interest towards one of the two teams, it's a very fun atmosphere to be a part of. So I will always prop up college tennis when I can. Steve.
Oh, no, it's great. I have great memories, David. I was lucky enough to call 4 or 5 times for ESPN, do the commentary at the NCAA Championships, the individual, when it was played in Athens, Georgia.
Great environment. Great environment.
I saw Pernfors win there, and then he went on to get to the finals of the French.
Yeah.
And not a year or two later. So I have great memories of the spirit of that event. So I second your enthusiasm. Let me put it that way.
Well, that's great. Yeah. Again, if you have an opportunity to go see it, definitely go. You'll have a great time. All right. What did we miss? Anything else we need to talk about?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I'm just patting both of us on the back. I think we touched just about every base.
Well, we are almost to our second slam. God, the clay court season to me, it always seems so long once it first gets started, but we're close.
Well,
we're close.
Last point, David. Last point I want to say. Now we address Novak. Carlos has to be careful. Carlos has come off successive tournament wins here. He's played a lot of matches in these last 2 events, after having had a brief injury break and missing Monte Carlo. But he wants to make absolute certain. I don't think physically he was 100% at Roland Garros last year, even though he skipped Rome. But that's because he'd done so much hard work from Indian Wells and Miami on through the clay court season. He seems to be pacing himself well, but he's got to be careful in Rome. The last thing he needs is an injury now, because he's looking like he'll be unless Djokovic manages to win Rome, which is possible. I would make Carlos the favorite for Roland Garros. I'd put him alone at the top.
And as of today, Monday night, the difference between number 1 and number 2 is 5 points. Novak is still number 1, but it's 5-point differential. So.
Well, Carlos just has to play that first match. I see. Literally, he could even lose it. As long as he plays in Rome, he'll pass Novak, because Novak is protecting the 1,000. Frankly, at this point, I don't think Novak cares that much. And, I think he's more pointing toward trying to win those majors.
Yes.
And I think Carlos will be doing the same thing. And then potentially, if they move, as we get through Roland Garros and Wimbledon, where Djokovic will go back looking for an 8th title, they could still end up going back and forth during the season. Carlos goes back to the U.S. Open, protecting all those points and winning the U.S. Open, where Novak didn't play last year. So we could see a lot of fluctuation. That number 1 ranking could be wrestled back and forth between the two quite a bit over the course of the season. Could be.
Yeah, no, it could be. And hey, I want to give a heads up to the listeners. We are scheduled to have a fun guest coming up with Steve and myself for later this week. So if it goes according to schedule, we'll probably release that one with our fun guest. You guys will like it, I promise. And then we'll probably do something, whether it's, in the latter stages or Rome or after Rome. We'll definitely do a wrap up. So for all those listening, thank you. And stay tuned. We got some fun episodes coming up. Thanks again, Steve.
Thank you, David.